Thank you, Faith. Uh, Good day to everyone. Welcome to everyone, whoever you are, wherever you are, and whenever you may be watching or listening to this talk, whether it's this live talk or at a later date, the recorded talk. Thank you for joining me today, and thank you to everyone at Sangha Live for inviting me to share some thoughts on this experience of being human. The Buddha's first truth or realization was along the lines of life is painful and then you die. If this is true, then how do we respond to the disappointments and the difficulties of life and the certainty of death? I've touched on many of today's themes in other talks, but I don't think that I'll be overly repeating myself today. I hope that I can offer some different angles, some different viewpoints, perhaps a creative perspective on what it is to be a living being, to consciously experience this human existence. And if I do happen to repeat myself, then it's worth remembering that repetition is a very effective teacher. In a moment, we'll take about 30 minutes to explore and cultivate some wise-heartedness as a noble response to the vicissitudes of this sometimes difficult and often disappointing human existence. I'll then offer some personal thoughts on the Dharma as the basic pattern of things, or how things really are, and how we might manage our expectations rather than being driven by them. Not just freedom without expectations, but equally freedom from expectations. And this will be followed by the opportunity to ask some questions or complain or make comments, which I will try to answer as best as I can. But first, please join me for some wise-heartedness meditation. And I'll just turn my So let's sit together about 30 minutes to practice mindfulness. Mindfulness in the sense of remembering to remember as we cultivate a wise heartedness in this guided meditation. And we'll start by using mindfulness to calm the breath as best as we can, to relax the body as best as we can, and to quiet the mind as best as we can. And then we'll practice and explore and cultivate as best as we can an attitude of wise-heartedness as it might manifest in our own lives, particularly in response to difficult situations, in response to difficult and uncertain times, in response to the ordinary and the mundane of everyday life. This meditation is particularly aimed at those new to meditation, but for those of you who are not new to meditation and perhaps have an aversion to guided meditations, please do feel free to just tune out and do your own thing for the next 30 minutes. Okay, start by taking an upright, dignified posture as best as you can in whatever environment you currently find yourself. Your posture might represent your heart's desire to awaken. That is your heart's noble desire to move away from avoidable stress and suffering. Your heart's noble desire to move towards the end of avoidable stress and suffering. Importantly, and perhaps even critically, this movement away from stress and suffering should not be driven by aversion to the disappointments and difficulties of life, but this movement might be guided by loving kindness and grounded in compassion for this experience of being human. If it's comfortable for you, you might let your eyes gently close. And we can begin our meditation by taking a very full, very deep breath in. And a very long, slow breath out. feeling the breath in the whole body as we do so. And again, a very full, very deep breath in. And a long, slow, deliberate breath out. Noticing the breath in the whole body, noticing our physical posture, particularly where our body connects with the ground or in our seat or where our legs and our feet touch the floor. We might bring to mind a sense of being grounded, supported, sitting here, right now, together with fellow travelers on this path to freedom. You might now allow your breath to settle down quite naturally. Allow your face to be soft. Let your jaw relax. I recommend having a small smile on your face, real or imagined. Let your shoulders drop back quite naturally to open up the heart area. Let your arms and your hands rest easily in your lap or on your thighs. The Buddha's instructions for the full awareness of breathing say that we should breathe in with mindfulness and we should breathe out with mindfulness. So, if it's helpful, we might silently note to ourselves, breathing in, I'm fully aware that I'm breathing in. And breathing out, I'm fully aware that I'm breathing out. Whether you focus your awareness of the breath at the nostrils, your chest, your belly, or your whole body is immaterial. What matters is that you notice the breath. So place your attention wherever it works best for you. Breathing in, we might notice the start, the middle, and the end of the breath. Notice whether it's a gap or a pause before breathing out. We notice the start, middle, and end of the out breath. And then noticing if there's a gap or a pause before this whole cycle of life starts again. After a while, when we're a little further into our meditation, we might let go of any verbal commentary and simply with a wordless awareness, we might notice in, out. Almost inevitably, it won't be long before you notice that your mind has wandered away from your breath. And that's just what the mind naturally wants to do. And when you do notice this, just smile and make a kind, silent, non-judgmental note of not breath, and return your full awareness to this wonderful, life-giving process of breathing. As you listen to my voice, you might maintain an ongoing awareness and mindfulness of each in-breath and each out-breath. We use mindfulness in our meditation practice to remember to stay with, or to remember to come back to our meditation object. In this case, the experience of breathing in and the experience of breathing out. As well as remembering to remember to stay with or to return to the embodied experience of breathing, mindfulness can also encompass the wider faculty and intention to remember something specific, or to keep something in mind, or simply not to forget something. This is particularly the case when the something that is being remembered being something that you have heard or read or perhaps had a personal realization of. But whatever the origin of the something that is being recalled or kept in mind, it will specifically be something that is helpful, skillful, and wholesome. Something that leads to your benefit and welfare. Remembering, as it were, that mindfulness is always in the service, ending or reducing suffering. In one of the talks in the Pali Canon, the Buddha asked the question, and what is the power of mindfulness? And then, as was often his teaching style, he answered the question himself. He says, it's when a practitioner is mindful, they have the utmost mindfulness and alertness and can remember and recall what was said and done long ago. This is called the power of mindfulness. Life rests upon a single breath. Whether on or off the cushion, we're invited to bring a friendly, affectionate interest to each and every breath. And we're also invited to bring a friendly, affectionate attitude to each and every breath. With a mindful interest and a mindful attitude to each and every breath, we're encouraged to befriend our practice. We're encouraged to befriend ourselves. Being at home with our breath cultivates serenity in the sense of being mentally untroubled. Being at ease with the breath cultivates calm in the sense of being physically at ease. A simple awareness of our breath, either on or perhaps more importantly, when we're off the cushion, can cultivate joy in the sense of both physical and mental pleasure. There's never a better place or a better time to practice mindfulness right here, right now. We can learn to relax into this moment, this only moment, where nothing is lacking or wanting, where we do not have to be at war with our present moment experience. Breathing in, I can intentionally calm my body. Breathing out, I can intentionally experience pleasure. There's nothing else to do. There's nowhere else to be, and there's no one special to become. This is calm and pleasant abiding in the here and now. Now that we've settled into our meditation, it might be helpful to bring our awareness to our chest. Wherever it is in your chest that you imagine your heart to be, we bring our awareness there. We might imagine that we're breathing in and out through our heart center. Feel free to place your hand on your heart if you want to, just for a breath or two to amplify the, the embodied experience of this practice. And we can continue today's meditation by taking a very full, very deep breath in through the heart area and a very long, slow breath out through the heart area. And again, a very full, very deep breath in through the heart area. And a very long, slow, deliberate breath out through the heart area. Having spent some time cultivating calm and pleasant abiding, you're now invited to cultivate wise-heartedness. We can do this by reciting one or some, or even all of the following aspirations, just like a silent whisper at the back of our mind. May I have stillness in the midst of chaos. May I be at ease in the midst of discomfort. May I be safe and well in the midst of uncertainty. May I live with kindness in the midst of all that is difficult. May I find joy in the midst of the ordinary and the mundane. Like our earlier serenity breath meditation, we can bring an affectionate curiosity and a friendly attitude to each recited phrase. May I have stillness in the midst of chaos. Without any judgment, but with some discernment, you might investigate this phrase. Do you currently have any sort of chaos in your life? What does that chaos look like? What is needed to bring stillness to chaos? Would it be for our benefit and welfare, or harm and suffering? If we could remember to hold this aspiration in our heart. In the midst of chaos, may I have stillness. May I be at ease in the midst of discomfort. Are you currently experiencing mental or physical discomfort? What does this discomfort feel like? What does it need? Or is it even possible to bring ease to this discomfort? And would it be for our benefit and welfare rather than harm and suffering if we could remember to hold this aspiration in our heart? May I be at ease in the midst of discomfort. May I be safe and well in the midst of uncertainty. If there is uncertainty in your life, how does it manifest? What does uncertainty feel like? Can you still be safe and well alongside the experience of uncertainty? Would it be for our benefit and welfare or harm and suffering if we could remember to hold this aspiration in our heart? May I be safe and well in the midst of uncertainty. May I live with kindness in the midst of all that is difficult. The mind naturally inclines towards the negative. Is it possible to befriend the difficult and the disappointing? Can we live with kindness in these situations? Would it be for our benefit and welfare or for our harm and suffering if we could remember to hold this aspiration in our heart? May I live with kindness even in the midst of everything that's difficult. May I find joy in the ordinary and the mundane. We're naturally inclined towards sensual pleasure, towards novelty, stimulation, and excitement. And sometimes we simply crave to be anywhere else but here. Is it possible to be content with this present moment experience, where nothing needs to be added, nothing needs to be taken away? If we abandon our preferences and our aversions, if we let go of our likes and dislikes, if we drop our wants and don't wants, then what is it that's left? Would it be for our benefit and welfare or harm and suffering if we could remember to hold this aspiration in our heart? May I find joy in the midst of the ordinary and the mundane. May I find joy in this present moment experience. In the sense of mindfulness being remembering to remember, we might recall the suggestion that the only wise response to any situation, to any experience, is a response of the wise heart. Through the intentional letting go of craving and aversion, along with the intentional cultivation and application of joy and appreciation, of friendliness and kindness, of generosity and compassion, and of understanding and acceptance, we might one day arrive at that perfect, unshakable, liberated heart. A heart that is free from craving, free from aversion, free from fear, and free from confusion. In the midst of chaos, may I have stillness. In the midst of discomfort, may I be at ease. In the midst of uncertainty, may I be safe and well. In the midst of all that is difficult, may I live with kindness. In the midst of the ordinary and the mundane, may I find joy. May I have stillness. May I be at ease. May I be safe and well. May I live with kindness. May I find joy. The phrases for the wise-hearted meditation were greatly influenced and inspired by the teachings of Christina Feldman, to whom and for which I am very grateful. As I often do, I'll start today with a quote from Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, who once said, "Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact, and everything we see is a perspective, not the truth." I have no claim to the truth. My practice, like my life, is far from perfect. Today, I would like to offer my current personal perspective on the basic pattern of things, or how things really are, particularly from the perspective of managing expectations. I say current personal perspective because part of my practice is to try to remain open to the reality that my views, opinions, and perspectives are all subject to change. There's a real trap whereby my views and opinions, whether they're religious or political or otherwise, they solidify and they become my identity, myself. And any challenge to these views and opinions becomes an existential threat to the solidified self, that self that must be protected at any cost. And this leads to inner and outer conflict. So I try to maintain a skillful doubt, not grasping and clinging to my views and opinions, and not grasping and clinging to a solid sense of self. There's an old Zen proverb that goes, great doubt, great awakening, little doubt, little awakening, and no doubt, no awakening. So I try to remain open to changing my views and opinions when new information presents itself, a form of curious doubt, perhaps even a liberating doubt. I find myself returning again and again to the same themes, particularly the central theme of how things really are and an appropriate response. And as some of you will know, I can be very focused on my own mortality and mindfulness of death. Mindfulness specifically in the sense of not forgetting the great certainty of life that I will die, and the great uncertainty of life, which is I don't know when, but more of that later. When I read the suttas from the early Pali texts, I see the Buddha as a troubled young man who left a wife and child and a comfortable lifestyle because he wanted to understand and to end his own suffering. And then, after 6 years of homeless wandering, he came to the conclusion that you can't get rid of pain, but that the appropriate response is to change your mind about it, to cultivate a different, noble perspective. One of the Buddha's primary realizations was, and I paraphrase this, life is painful and then you die. So, if this is true, then what is the appropriate response to the difficulties and the disappointments of life and the certainty of death? Sometimes it seems that life is just one difficulty after another, one disappointment after another. And we start to question, will I ever be happy? When will this end? I think an interest in and an investigation of the natural processes of the Dharma provides a better understanding of nature and a better understanding of myself and this human experience. The Dharma is about a healthy relationship with reality, a noble relationship with reality. The pursuit of the Dharma is in the service of the elimination of existential dissonance, the ending of a self-centered exceptionalism. That is the idea that these truths apply to other people, but not to me. The word Dharma is normally presented as the teachings of the Buddha as handed down over the last 2,500 years by various traditions. But during today's talk, I will rely on the English Pali scholar Peter Harvey's translation of Dharma as being the basic pattern of things. As such, this definition of Dharma as the basic pattern of things, or how things really are, goes beyond any limits implicit in the Buddha's or Buddhism's recorded teachings. Indeed, the basic pattern of things, or how things really are, cannot be confined to any established texts or teachings because everything changes, including human knowledge. So throughout this session, whenever I use the term Dharma or the basic pattern of things or how things really are, I'm not restricting myself to the early Pali texts or any other Buddhist literature, past or present. I shared recently at an online sit and share meeting that I was perhaps diluting my pursuit of the Dharma with regular excursions into philosophy and psychology and particularly neuroscience. But in hindsight, maybe I was wrong to say dilute. In hindsight, I think that actually I'm strengthening my pursuit of and my response to the basic pattern of things by continuing to engage with Gautama's Dharma, specifically the Dharma of the early Pali texts, alongside and in combination with ancient and modern philosophies, modern psychologies, and the ever-advancing neurosciences. It's not my intention to tell you how you should pursue your life, your religion, or your Dharma, or your philosophy, your psychology, or science. But for me, unless I understand and accept the basic pattern of things, then the veil of confusion will remain in place and the curtains on reality will remain closed to me. This week, my attention was drawn to an interesting article on the 2007 summer edition of Tricycle Buddhist magazine that references the religious historian Elaine Pagels. She describes how religious practitioners might adopt certain practices and beliefs selectively and reinterpret texts in what she calls the process of creative misreading. I hope that this talk is not so much a creative misreading, but rather a non-dogmatic, equanimous, creative perspective based on personal experience and practice. But at the end of the day, or the end of this session, only you can be the judge of that. Earlier this year, I travelled across Europe by train, ferry, and bus from Tralee on the west coast of Ireland through 35 countries as far as Turkey's borders with Armenia and Iran. It was a great opportunity to consciously watch myself, to watch other people, and to watch the world, particularly through the lens of Buddhist and evolutionary psychology. Please don't think that I'm being judgmental in my observations. I'm not trying to say what I think is right or wrong, or even what I think is skillful or unskillful. I'm just trying to observe and to discern my own and other people's behaviors. But enough caveats, let me begin. In terms of expectations, the Buddha lifts the veil, uncovering the Dharma, the basic pattern of things, and offers us a peek behind the curtains of how things really are. He says something that should be obvious and self-evident. But we're ignorant of this reality, not so much ignorant in the sense of not knowing, but often in the sense of not wanting to know. The Buddha is practical and pragmatic and compassionate. He tries to manage our expectations. He doesn't pull any punches, and he doesn't offer any compensatory spoonful of sugar. The Buddha's teachings are realistic. He tells us what we need to hear, even if it's not what we want to hear. And he teaches out of compassion. He communicates not in a harsh, shocking way, but as a simple, stated realization or recognition or truth. In his first talk, after his own breakthrough experience under the Bodhi tree, the Buddha sets the wheel of Buddhist Dharma in motion when he shares 4 realizations or truths. The first of which I like to paraphrase along the lines of, Life is painful, and then you die. The Buddhist monk Ajahn Sucitto, in his book Crossing the Flood, says, the Buddha's first full teaching was about the Four Noble Truths. That sermon was given to people who had already gone forth as renunciants and who had made commitments to a spiritual path for many years. So it's important to remember that this is an advanced teaching. The Buddha puts death on the table, as it were. This is further refined and evidenced in his famous talk on the four foundations of mindfulness, with its contemplations on parts of the body and the process of death and physical decay. These are higher teachings given to established practitioners who were already searching for the answers in life. These teachings were not readily offered to lay people, to people who had not previously been made ready to accept these realizations or these truths, if you like. His first realization or truth, as I said, can be paraphrased, can be further paraphrased as life is difficult and disappointing and you don't get what you want and then you die. More formally from the scripture, he says, now this month's for the ennobled ones is the true reality, which is pain. Birth is painful, aging is painful, illness is painful, death is painful, sorrow, lamentation, physical pain, unhappiness and distress are painful. Union with what is disliked is painful. Separation from what is liked is painful. Not to get what one wants is painful. In brief, the 5 bundles of grasping fuel are painful. Just as an aside, I'll explain that the 5 bundles of grasping fuel is shorthand for everything that makes up a human being, that makes up a self. In a different talk, the Buddha recounts the teachings of an earlier teacher. He says that once upon a time, monks, there was a teacher called Araka. He was a religious founder and was free of sensual desire. He had many hundreds of disciples, and he taught them like this. Life as a human is short, brief, fleeting, full of suffering and distress. Be thoughtful and wake up. Do what's good and lead the spiritual life. For no one who is born can escape death. One of my favorite suttas is a talk which features a different monk. It doesn't feature the Buddha in person, but features a different monk explaining what brought him to the monastic life. And he explains it was when he heard the Buddha's 4 summaries of the Dharma. And the Buddha's 4 summaries of the Dharma, which in many ways for me are more pertinent and more real to me than the 4 Noble Truths, are firstly that life in any world is unstable. You can be swept away. And as we've seen with various disasters recently in America and in Libya and in Turkey and Syria, you can be swept away at any time. So life in any world is unstable. It is swept away. Life in any world has no shelter and it has no protector. Life in any world has nothing of its own. Everyone has to leave it all behind and die. And life in any world is incomplete, lacking, insatiate. We are the slaves of craving. So this is the Buddha's starting point. There are no rainbows or unicorns or happily ever afters. Life is difficult and disappointing. You don't get what you want and then you die. So with his first teaching, the Buddha tries to manage my expectations of life and death. He doesn't say that death is the solution to the pain of life, but changing my relationship and reactivity to the pain is an appropriate and effective response. Waking up to death is waking up to life. Death gives meaning to and motivates how I live my life. It focuses my mind on what is important and what matters most. What is an appropriate response to this fact or truth, or this ultimate manifestation of the basic pattern of things? Is a continued denial of death an appropriate response? Or should I continue to pretend I won't die? Or do I embrace death as the final destination for everyone? It's said that life rests upon a single breath, and we're all on the same unstoppable trajectory to that final breath. Mindfulness, in the sense of remembering to remember, despite life's difficulties and discomforts and disappointments, we might remember that life is precious and full of possibilities and potentiality, but life is fragile and it can be swept away at any moment. And I can't stress enough to keep in mind that life is worth living. Directly related to this first realization is the truth that we are slaves of craving. In fact, this is the second realization of truth that the Buddha shares during that first teaching. From a neuroscience perspective, we're genetically pre-programmed and conditioned to crave sensual gratification, to crave stimulation, excitement, and novelty. We're pre-programmed to survive at any cost. We crave continued becoming, continued existence. We crave to see and be seen. In some circumstances, we crave not to be seen. Life becomes too complex, too painful, or too dangerous, and we might just want the ground to open up and swallow us. We crave for the extermination of whatever it is that's not liked. Having thought about these two truths or realizations for some time now, I'm drawn to the idea of reframing the second noble truth, this truth of being the slaves of craving, as craving being the source of much of our avoidable suffering. To reframe these as the compulsions to protect, to promote, and to satisfy a self that can never be truly satisfied, and then to repeat it because it can't be permanently satisfied. Now, to protect, to promote, and to satisfy a self, these are not delineated. These compulsions overlap and trigger each other. In the service of brevity, and because we have limited time, I'll try to illustrate these compulsions with examples from Buddhism, neuroscience, and my recent travels. The compulsion to protect. 2,500 years ago, the Buddha said, with our thoughts, we create the world. And modern neuroscience informs me that my world is fabricated by my brain. It's a movie in which I am the star. Neuroscience also says that we are survival machines. My brain's only purpose is to keep me alive at any cost, and to consciously or unconsciously get me to procreate for the purpose of producing offspring. I'm primed to protect in the service of survival, both for myself and my children. The American psychologist and author of the book, The Buddha's Brain, Rick Hanson, says, at the most basic, microscopic level, it is the nature of mind to cling. As a strategy for passing on genes, it has worked spectacularly well. But Mother Nature doesn't care if we suffer. She only cares about grandchildren. This leads us to crave safety. As I traveled through Europe, through 35 countries, 35 mostly capitals, it wasn't uncommon to come across fortresses and castles that weren't so much built to protect us from the elements, but were built to protect us from each other. The walls have been built to keep our enemies out, and sometimes, in the case of the Berlin Wall, to keep the population in against their will. I noticed as I traveled my own craving for certainty, my own craving for security, my own craving to feel in control and protected, in needing to book bus tickets and train tickets and hotels, and feeling uncomfortable if those things weren't in place. As I traveled through Europe, I saw the same characters, the same cast of characters at familiar places, particularly around bus stations and train stations. The beggars, old and young, taxi drivers, labourers in the field, people striving to make a living. Um, I was struck at when I was in Belgrade, and I went to the large fort there, wonderful fort overlooking the Danube, um, which its most famous siege of 1456 was against the Ottoman Empire, and it struck me as I'd been travelling through Serbia, and Kosovo, and as a former Yugoslav republic, that even now, all these hundreds of years later, nothing's changed, and we're still fighting each other. We still create stereotypes to help us feel safe. People are constantly on, throughout my travels, I noticed people, as well as myself, people are constantly on the move for work or for pleasure, for births and deaths, for separations and reunions. And through 35 countries, some with free movement, others with border controls. And the almost delusion of it, that this line in the sand, that this side of the line is one place and this side of the line is another place. They, quite intriguing. It was wonderful to travel through Europe where there were no border controls, and you often didn't even know you were passing from one country to another, as I did in Latvia and Lithuania. And also, I took the opportunity to walk from Finland to Sweden for an hour across the border. And again, with no border controls, it's wonderful to have that experience. The compulsion to promote ourselves, which overlaps with the compulsion to protect ourselves. We promote for ourselves for status, for attraction, for affiliations. Just think of fact, I saw in several places, people taking selfies. This obsession with the self and image. People posing, it's amazing, at famous sites and even famous religious sites, Muslim and Christian, people posing for Instagram posts. I noticed the clothes that people were wearing to either make them stand out or to allow them to blend in, to be seen or not to be seen. Throughout Europe, in some very cold climates, there were people wearing shorts in winter. They tended to be people with tattoos. I've got nothing against people with tattoos or nothing against people wearing shorts, but this is a form of promoting the self, of solidifying yourself. This is me. This is my identity. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I'm not judging that. I'm just observing that this is the case. The same for haircuts. The strangest of haircuts I observed, and in many instances, people promenade, and it's a very pleasant thing to do, to walk up and down, to have a cup of coffee, to be seen and to see. And of course, the constant social media connection in some places where everyone on whatever means of transport it was is just stuck on a phone or a tablet or a laptop. This constant social media connection, the fear of missing out. And fashion victims, some very strange clothes. And I'm older now. I tend to dress more conservatively. But when I was younger, I was famous for lime green hipsters and platform boots. And I think back now, just dread of what I must have looked like. The compulsion to satisfy, as I've already mentioned, we're compelled to seek sensual gratification. I recently finished listening to a Robert Rankin book, an audio book, a comedy novel, the title of which is Sex, Drugs and Sausage Rolls. And I think this sums up our desires quite nicely. We like to see and be seen. We get a buzz from using social media, all those likes and acknowledgements and hearts. Wanting to be seen, heard, and acknowledged contributes to this solidification of a self. In many capital cities, particularly near train stations and bus stations, I was quite surprised by the number of betting shops, casinos, slot machine palaces, and sex shops. These services catering to people's sensual needs, as well as bars, pubs, and in Amsterdam, smoke shops. It was interesting in many places of transportation, stations and bus stations, watching couples, tears of joy and tears of sorrow, people meeting each other again, or people parting for the final time. Now, none of these compulsions, whether it's the trying to protect myself, trying to promote myself, or trying to satisfy myself, result in permanent or lasting satisfaction. I'm compelled to repeat the process, to do it all over again. But once we can see or glimpse this basic pattern of things as life is difficult and then you die, then we can change our relationship and response to this reality. There's nothing inherently wrong with protecting, promoting, and satisfying a healthy sense of self. But these behaviors, if unconsciously pursued, can lead to chaotic situations, individually or collectively. They lead to discomfort, mental or physical. They lead to unease in the face of uncertainty. They lead to anger and hatred in response to difficulties. And they lead to constant craving for excitement, stimulation, and novelty. Something very sad about certainly the early part of my journey through Europe, traveling through Paris, the Jewish Quarter in Antwerp, Anne Frank's house in Amsterdam, the Berlin Wall in Germany. There's a museum in Vilnius in Lithuania that was previously a prison for the KGB and the Gestapo, with an execution room down by the cells. Arriving in Warsaw on the anniversary of the Jewish uprising. It reminds me that man hands on misery to man. This desire to protect and to promote can have very unskillful, unwholesome, and devastating consequences. But so how do we respond to this not getting what we want, life's difficulties and disappointments? And eventually we're going to die. And any appropriate response always moves us away from suffering and moves us towards the end of suffering. It's always out of compassion and for the situation, and not aversion to the situation. So the responses can be many and varied, but with this characteristic of moving away from suffering. The Dharma, as the basic pattern of things, carries an intentionality in the same way as mindfulness carries an intentionality to move away from suffering. The Dharma is alive and it changes and it grows. The Buddha's final words can be paraphrased as everything falls apart, so proceed with care. I recently read the phrase, no expectations, no disappointments. Well, that's fine, but I don't think there's anything wrong with realistic expectations. Expect the best, but plan for the worst. Life might be seen to be pointless or meaningless, or as Albert Camus suggests, life is absurd. But life is still worth living. Life can be fulfilling despite the natural ups and downs and difficulties and disappointments. For those people in recovery from substance addictions and process addictions, There is life without alcohol and other drugs and distracting compulsions, and it's a very good life. We can give whatever meaning to our life that leads to our individual collective thriving. And remember the Buddha's third realization that anyone can experience, anyone can personally verify the absence of cravings, aversions, and compulsions, even briefly. And this is existence, however short lived, without suffering. This is nirvana. We can have whatever purpose or meaning, life can have whatever purpose or meaning that we give to it. Life is a series of disappointments, one after the other, big disappointments, little disappointments. It's not personal, it's just life. If I can learn to ride the waves of disappointment, then they change from tsunamis to ripples. They're still disappointments, but I don't get swept away by them, and I don't drown so much. To truly live life is to live life with care, to mindfully live our life, to mindfully live our best life. In the Buddha's talk on living well, he says that there's no finer mindfulness than kindness and no better way to live life. The late Mayor Angelou said, my mission in life is not merely to survive, but to thrive, and to do so with some passion, some compassion, some humour and some style. I hope today's session has, at least in part, met some of your expectations. And I'll close today's talk by reiterating the phrases from our opening meditation. In the midst of chaos, may we have stillness. In the midst of discomfort, may we be at ease. In the midst of uncertainty, may we be safe and well. In the midst of all that's difficult, may we live with kindness. In the midst of the ordinary and the mundane, may we find joy. And before we open up to questions and answers, I just mentioned dana as well, that this practice of generosity allows me to continue my studies and to offer teachings when invited to do so in person and online. And of course, the dana also allows Sangha Live to offer more of these teachings. And I'll just mention at this point that I would like to explore this topic of freedom without expectations, freedom from expectations, a day-long workshop in London for London Insight on July 20th next year, if you're interested. So that's it. We're going to open up to questions and answers. I'm operating off my phone, so I can only see myself. So I'm going to leave it to Faith to manage questions and answers, if that's okay.
Great. So yeah, you can either raise your hand or just type your message in the chat. We'll give you, can take a little while. There's a message in the chat there, Vince. Can you please post do you see it? Yeah.
I'll try and type it in. The phrases for the wise-heartedness meditation are on a slide on the download page of the Fifth Precept website. So if I just put that in the chat. And there's a number of resources there. Fifth Precept. Yeah. So you're welcome to use that slide for your own purposes. So because I'm working off my phone, I'm not actually very sure of the time. Okay, so we've got a little bit of time.
There's another question from Natalie. I know this is a big question, but I'm wondering if the Buddha, or even your personal take on skillful means to respond to compulsions.
It's very difficult. Yeah, the Buddha had an answer, and I probably won't be able to find it quickly enough now. He had a wonderful way of responding. Can't even find the glasses. I can't put my finger on it straight away. I have got it in my sort of collected references. Yeah, compulsions. He gives about 5 steps, and he effectively, um, take yourself out of the situation. Uh, it consciously change what you're thinking about. I can't remember all. And the final suggestion, he says, if all else fails, bite your tongue and grin and bear it. So he offers these sort of 5 suggestions for dealing with compulsions, with cravings. From my own perspective, it and experience, certainly in terms of alcoholism, it passes with time. Cravings and compulsions and desires passing with time. But Natalie, I don't have a specific answer. Everyone's different, and it depends what the compulsion is. And some compulsions are easier to relate to than others. But certainly, there are support groups, and if some compulsions benefit from therapies. So acknowledging that a compulsion is harmful, and you'd like to change it, is obviously the first step. And then, yes, skillful means in finding support groups. But I can't go. I can't say much more than that without going around in circles. It's a difficult. It's difficult to be specific, really. But certainly, I would suggest therapy, support groups, and a deeper investigation in neuroscience. Get as much information as possible. Neuroscience, psychology, and the Buddha's Dharma, if that supports you, or any other material that might support you. Thank you, Natalie.
Olivia, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Olivia. You can hear me. Thank you so much, Vince, for all of this. So I don't know. I'm hoping this question makes sense. So thinking about that, kind of coming to terms with the suffering of life, and coming to terms with the challenge. I'm a sober alcoholic in recovery, and I've been sober for a couple of years now, and I got sober in 12-step programs. And the third step is about turning your will and your life over to the care of a higher power, as you understand that higher power. And to me, that step kind of sums up this idea of coping with the suffering, because I've kind of come to understand it as trusting when things don't go my way, when life gets hard, trusting that that it's going to be okay, and that it's going to unfold in a way that, you know, will help me grow and teach me necessary lessons. And so I guess I've just kind of recently started to explore Buddhism, but I guess what I'm wondering is is there kind of like an equivalent to that third step? Is there, in Buddhism, is there kind of an equivalent to this idea of letting go and trusting the universe and trusting that it's going to unfold as it should? I don't know if this makes sense, but I just thought
it does make sense. But of course, you know, in terms of Buddhism, there is no higher power as such. The higher power is just how things really are. You know, there's this natural dharma of the basic pattern of things and how things really are. So it's living in response to that fact. And part of that fact, how things really are, the basic pattern of things, is that I don't have a fixed, unchanging, controllable self. I'm just this conglomerate of things that go to make up this central figure in the movie in which I'm a star. But what the Buddha does teach us is that it's not personal. Yeah. So I don't have to take anything personally. So if that makes sense. So I try to live my life in accordance with the basic pattern of things, particularly through the lens of neuroscience and psychology, and it's not personal. And I think things can happen to me to be directed at me that are directed at me personally. And I've had some rather unfortunate instances of this in my life, and certainly over the last few years. But the Buddha's answer is I don't have to take it personally. Yeah, they might be directed at me personally, but I don't have to take it personally. I'll be quick because of the time. Surprisingly, I'm getting back from my travel in Europe. I got back to my living situation here in Ireland, which is not comfortable. It's very uncomfortable. It's not easy for various reasons I won't go into. And I fell into a deep depression. This is new for me, but I recognize all the symptoms of depression. And what this practice says is I don't have to be depressed about being depressed. And this is the liberating aspect of not attaching to a fixed, unchanging self. Yes, there are symptoms of depression. There are causes and conditions that have led to the arising of those symptoms of depression, but I don't have to be depressed about being depressed. I can bring kindness and compassion to that reality. Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah, it does. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate that.
Thank you. And Victoria.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Hi, hello. Well, you're so articulate that I think you've rendered us all tongue-tied, hence the silence. I'm wondering about the other extreme. So there's the extreme in terms of like addictions and things like that, and then there's well, actually it's not an extreme. Let's see if I can articulate better. I know there's not much time. I'm always plagued, all my life I've been plagued by the idea that in terms of craving, that the best route, once one accepts sort of the path of virtue, so to speak, is to go wholeheartedly on that path. But I don't do it. I haven't done it. In other words, give up all one's worldly possessions, serve the poor and the sick and the lonely, and just wholeheartedly give it all away, give one's life away, sort of be a saint in effect. which I haven't done, but then I find myself plagued by a kind of guilt. So the sort of acknowledging the precepts in Buddhism, I feel like all of us should live as monastics in our own way. But I can't seem to do it because I enjoy life so much. I love life. And so I'm just wondering, I feel like that's a kind of addiction in itself. I'm not sure if I'm making any sense, but it's like it's very kind of an extreme position that I myself can't follow. And it feels like I'm imprisoned by my own sort of sense of, why should I enjoy life when other people can't?
It's difficult. This seemingly first talk that the Buddha gave to these 5 previous colleagues who he'd been practicing with, and he starts his talk by saying, I found it, the middle way between the the overindulgence in sensual pleasures and the attachment to sensual pleasures, and the attachment to self-mortification, to doing ourselves down. There is a middle way. And don't forget, the Buddha went off and ate cow dung and went around naked and slept in carnal grounds, and young men urinated on him and poked him with sharp sticks, and he meditated in the heat of the day and the depth of night in the winter. All these austere processes, and none of it worked. So these extremes of extreme pleasure and extreme denial, self-mortification almost. There is a middle way. And for me, my reality is, you only live once. I've got no interest in past lives. I don't believe in future lives. This is my one and only life. So how am I going to live it? What matters most? What's important? Can I thrive? Like Maya Angelou says, can I thrive? Can I do it with a flair? And can I be compassionate about it? And I think we can move through life without causing harm and leaving debris and disaster behind us, and enjoy. I say enjoy life as far as possible. Yeah, why not? Absolutely, why not? I'm a hedonist. I enjoy new sights, new sounds, new smells, new tastes, new experiences. I see nothing wrong with enjoying them. Yes, if it causes me suffering to go out seeking them, that would be different. But I've got no problem. In fact, that's what makes life so important, to enjoy that new sight, that new point of contact, that new smell, that new taste, that new experience. But equally, to come home or to come back to where I live, I don't like to call it home, to come back to where I live, and being content with the ordinary and the mundane, to relish and to take time. And does that make sense, Victoria?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I see, as you're talking, how I'm very extreme, and the middle way, of course. I mean, the middle way is the central sort of facet of Buddhism that is keeps it all in balance.
And I think the most important part of the middle way is right view, is understanding that first, second, and third realization. Life is short, and then life's difficult, disappointing, and then you die. As human beings, we are pre-programmed to crave, but with practice and awareness, we can experience moments without craving, without aversion, without confusion. And when we experience them, that sense of well-being, however fleeting it might be, take pleasure in it. Absolutely take pleasure in it.
I love
Enjoy
it. Oh, well, thank you. I will enjoy now. Thank you.
I can't see any more hands up, so I don't know how we're doing for time.
We've got 3 minutes, and there's just one question in the chat, so maybe you can give a short answer to it.
Let me go to the chat. Marnie, thank you for your question. The we're pre-programmed to seek out mates and have sex, and all for the purposes, whether we like it or not, to have children. The idea of contraception is a modern idea, and prior to that, a lot of sexual encounters would have produced children, and that's all the brain's worried about: keep me alive, I have children, and I keep my children alive, and that continues the species. As Rick Hanson says, nature doesn't care about me; it cares about my grandchildren. So the neurobiology aspects of sex, and all the neurons that fire up for that type of pleasure, are exactly the same neurons that fire up with cocaine and with certain other drugs. So I see a correlation there, a neurocorrelation there. But people take drugs for different reasons. Some people take drugs to get out of life, and others for excitement. I personally, I drank to numb myself from the pain of life. Other people take drugs because they believe it leads to excitement. Is there a better solution to end the suffering of alcoholics and addicts? I don't know what you mean by a better solution. I think by acknowledging that, this way of behaving, be it a process addiction or a compulsion or a substance addiction, we have to start somewhere and say, well, this doesn't work, so I have to change it, and to change it out of kindness. So the tipping point for me was when I made the distinction between abstinence, which I've been trying to do for a couple of years, and it was driving me mad, like quite literally nervous breakdown type thing, and then a monk in Thailand sort of directed me towards abandonment. So I was abstaining from things I thought I wanted to do. Was really what I need to do was abandon my old life for a new life, and to completely leave my old life behind. And that distinction between abstinence and abandonment, certainly it freed me up. And it's been 26 or 7 years now. Lost count. I think it's 27 years. I hope that helps, Marnie. Just changing our attitude, not taking it so personally. It's not our fault. It's the way things are. Man hands on misery to man. So a lot of our problems are inherited. They're not personal, and we do the best we can with kindness and compassion. So thank you, Marnie. I think we've gone about a minute over, Faith.
Yeah, so you can wrap up. Thanks, Vince.
So yeah, I mean, that's it from me. Sorry. So thank you, everyone. It's been an interesting session. It's given me lots to think about. Sorry if I couldn't answer your questions as well as I might have liked, but it's been great to sit with you all, and hopefully I'll see you again here, there, or somewhere. Thank you.